About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion pretty late at night, and the drive was about 2 hours. I didn't stay the night because I had to be back for work the following day. Most of the drive was on roads with dense bushes and trees on either side. The real creepy ones you see a lot in movies. Anyway, I had been driving about 45 minutes, and I was starting to get really tired. You know how sometimes you just suddenly become really tired? Out of nowhere? Well, yeah, that happened to me. I knew I wasn't going to last, but I didn't come across any place that I felt I could park and safely sleep. Anyway, after it became clear to me that I wasn't going to find a place to pull up, and my tiredness wasn't going away, I did something very questionable. I pulled over to the side of the road onto the grass, behind some bushes, to try and hide my car from anybody else who was going to come past. The roads weren't empty. I came across another car every few minutes or so. I made a mental note that the time was 11:22, and then fell asleep. Sometime later, I was awoken by a scratching sound. I looked at the clock, 11:50. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and because I was still extremely tired, I didn't bother looking around and simply went back to sleep. I was later awoken by the same sound, and it was now 12:40. This time it really freaked me out because the sound didn't stop. The thought ran across my mind that it was just an animal inspecting the car, but why would it return almost an hour after it had left the previous time? I looked in my rear-view mirror and just managed to catch a glimpse of something running away into the forest. Now, at the time, I thought it was the damn hook killer. You know, the one that scratched that couple's car and then slaughtered the guy when he got out to investigate? Fuck that, I thought to myself. So I got the hell out of there. There was a bin no more than 100 yards up the road, and as I came around it, there was a fucking car, parked off to the side of the road with the driver's side door opened. I slowed down just to look to see if anyone was in there. There wasn't. Then I looked in my rearview mirror. I didn't see anything, and all of a sudden, this guy comes sprinting around the corner. He starts screaming at me, shouting stuff like, Hey you, get the fuck out of your car. Now. I noped the fuck out of there and sped off. I never saw the guy again. Moral of the story? Don't fucking sleep on the side of a deserted road. A few summers ago, I went for a bike ride around midnight with a friend. We went our separate ways at the end of the evening, and I had about 2 blocks to ride back by myself. Because of construction, I had to ride on the sidewalk, but the streets were dead, but it wasn't a problem until right where I was about to turn left onto my street. There was this man walking by himself, maybe 40s, a little scruffy but not homeless. The sidewalk was narrow, and I didn't want to freak him out, so when I got about 6 feet behind him, I said, Hey, behind you. And he turned around and gave me this super angry look. I turned down my street and he started to follow me, literally screaming about how I was a fucking cunt and he was going to kill me and all that. I live right off the corner and I didn't want him to figure that out, so I decided to do another loop around the block. That's not the scary part. The scary part is that when I looped back around and looked down the street, I saw him standing on my fucking front stoop, staring out at the street like the motherfucker knew I lived there. He saw me ride by again, but he didn't say anything. I ended up going back to the friends, but my bike got stolen from the alleyway by the house 2 days later. The guy in question was definitely not homeless. We have a large population of mentally ill in that area, unfortunately, downtown of a medium-sized city. So if I didn't think the sidewalk was too narrow to pass otherwise, I wouldn't have disturbed him. Half the scary part was that he looked pretty much completely normal for my area. That being said, I ended up texting my mom, and she made the decision not to notify law enforcement until my bike was stolen. I had awesome parents who let me sleep in the living room on weekend nights when I was very young because my sister was a light sleeper and I could stay up until dawn. But of course, I always end up sleeping on the couch because Nick at night made me tired. So, one night I wake up to the prickly feeling. Like an instinct, just bolted into a sitting position and stared out the front window. We lived in rural Georgia, so you can imagine the magnitude of trees. In perfect light cast from the moon, I see a silhouette of someone in this fucking tree. The family dog dashes to the window and is snarling into the glass. Terrified, I run into my parents' room and try to explain to my parents that there is a strange man outside. My dad grabs something defensive and darts outside with the dogs to beat the wax off the guy. I tremble in mom's arms until dad comes home, and says he saw no one and to go to bed. I decide to sleep in my regular bedroom. I fill my sister in as to what happened. Dad is making regular rounds in the house with a cup of coffee. We're all still and I finally think, I can sleep? No. I notice the man outside my window. From what I can see in the moonlight, he gives me a shush signal and runs away. Just turns around to run a straight line away. I swear I couldn't stop crying for what felt like hours. My house sits farther back in the lot than most other houses. It is a strange layout as well. The sidewalk runs the length of the living room and ends at the front porch, which lets into the living room. Large windows that do not open allow great light to get into the living room, but at the cost of no privacy. The rest of my family was on vacation, and having the house to myself, I decided I would get smashed. Well, I pass out on the couch in the living room at about 9, when I realized I was too scared to walk back to my room. The couch is right underneath these big windows. I woke up suddenly, not knowing why. I had a severe case of the chills, and I could not figure out why. Then the banging started. It came from right above me. I didn't move, but I opened my eyes and looked up at the window. Someone was standing there, pounding on the glass. Without moving, I looked at the cable box. It was around 3 in the morning. The banging continued. Then it stopped suddenly, but I still didn't move. Then it happens again, coming from 2 different directions now. Someone is banging on the window, and another person is banging on the front door. They kept doing it and wouldn't go away. Finally, after about 40 minutes, they quit. It was the most terrifying event I can recall at the moment. It made me a nervous wreck after that. I called a friend the next day to see if he would come over and stay for the rest of the week, and his response was, "What for? So that we can both be murdered in our sleep? Thanks a lot, asshole." I was 17 and had just gotten my license. Back in high school, my friends and I had made it a mission to find abandoned houses to throw parties in. We had a few good candidates, but the motherlode was this place I would pass on my house from work. It was an undeveloped shell of a huge home with a large property in the back. I had told one of my friends about it, and one day before we went to see a movie, I took him to the house. It was about dusk in summer, so I had my headlights on. I pulled into the front of the house, and we were there for like 10 seconds tops before we pulled back to go to the main road. A minute later, this big truck pulls up behind us with its high beams on and riding our ass. My friend and I took note of it, but paid it no mind as we headed back to the main road. At the light, I turned right, but the truck cut through the gas station at the corner and blocked us off. Out of the truck comes this big hulk of a man, and my friend and I are shitting our pants. He bangs on the window and I roll it down. Now, the really freaky part is that this is a busy road and now there was no one in sight. He asks us what we were doing at the house, and I quickly lied and said we were making a U-turn. He stares at us for a few seconds, smiles, and sends us on our way. To this day, the house remains unfinished, and I'm convinced it's a drug operation of some sort. I lived in a bizarre little house as a child. It was incredibly tall and thin, like an attached house except freestanding, with 3 floors, a basement, and an attic. It was full of quirks, such as 2 fully functional fireplaces, a shower stall in the center of the basement, a backyard so small that you could not take 5 paces without hitting the fence, and an old-timey rope-pull dumbwaiter that led from the kitchen to my bedroom. I loved that weird little place, but unfortunately it was incredibly old, and half of its charm was the fact that it seemed to have been designed by an inarticulate conclave of lunatics, and eventually the repair costs exceeded what my parents were willing to sink into it, and we had to move. Preparing for the move was a chore. I packed most of my stuff myself, and I had taken to throwing stuff down the dumbwaiter and shoving all my clothes so thickly in my closet that they became a single solid brick of fabric. While clearing that closet out, in fact, I came across a feature I hadn't noticed before: an attic entrance in the roof. Being an adventurous kid, I opened her up, stood on the clothes brick, and began my first and last exploration into the topmost part of our weird little house. The first thing I noticed was that it wasn't as dark as it should have been. The place was strung with old, red Christmas lights which still burned with leftover incandescence, and a dozen little cracks and holes peeped down into all the bedrooms below. The second thing I noticed was that the place was set up for habitation. The insulation was plasticed away. There was an old gurney piled with sleeping bags and sheets, and a rusted mint green refrigerator which still worked when I tested it. The third thing was the bones. There were a lot of bones. I was a kid at the time, with a limited understanding of anatomy, but there were bones of all types heaped into a series of piles around the center of the attic. Small and large, clean and white, from every and any imaginable sort of creature, haphazardly stacked in a half-dozen osseous clumps. 2 of them were blackened, as if someone had tried to burn them, and the walls nearest those blackened piles were scrawled in dark bone char messages. Mostly they were just smears, but the word sorry appeared more than once. That room had been sitting over my head for 8 years, while I slept in my bed not even knowing. A week after gaining my CPR certification, I had to try and perform CPR on a woman dying of a heroin overdose. I was at a thrift store with some friends looking for Halloween costumes, and someone came in saying that someone was passed out in the parking lot. I was in the dressing room, and it just got super quiet, so I came out and told them I was certified and I'd go take a look and that they needed to call 911. I go outside and don't see anyone on the ground. Someone comes out and shouts that the person is in the car that's parked far out by itself. I ran over and honestly freaked the fuck out. She was pretty much already dead, completely blue in the face, slumped against her car window. She had the red druggy rings around her eyes, but those were blue too because she was so oxygen deprived. We opened the door and I'll never forget that when we turned her head to see if she still had a pulse, she had tears running down her face. We pulled her out of the car, put her on the ground, and took her pulse again because the first person to do it wasn't sure. We started CPR and the ambulance arrived about a minute after. They got her strapped up and in and continued CPR. They had another ambulance come and those EMTs got out and there was literally like 6 of them surrounding her. The cop told us they had administered some type of drug that can apparently reverse heroin overdoses if given in time, but she was pretty much dead already. They would do the necessary stuff until they could get to the hospital and call it, according to him. I also remember when we opened the door there was heroin needles and empty pill bottles all over the floor. She wasn't very old. We also think she had kids. She had some toys and a car seat, plus 2 names tattooed on her.
Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more stories. I will be posting at least 4 times a week. So if you like these, there will be more stories to help fuel your nightmares.